Titan was the most beautiful German Shepherd anyone at Pinecrest Animal Shelter had ever seen, yet he couldn't keep a home, returned 7 times for completely contradictory reasons. The truth behind his rejections would ultimately reunite a broken warrior with his battle companion and heal wounds deeper than anyone could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Titan was a magnificent German Shepherd, a striking specimen. Of the breed, with his rich black and tan coat, alert ears that stood at perfect attention, and intelligent amber eyes that seemed to perceive more than any ordinary dog should. His muscular build spoke of power and agility, while his proud posture hinted at noble lineage. At 4 years old, he was in the prime of his life, healthy, strong, and breathtakingly handsome. Everyone at the Pinecrest Animal Shelter agreed that Titan was exceptional. His presence commanded attention whenever potential adopters walked through the facility. His kennel was always the first stop on tours, with staff proudly introducing him as their resident supermodel. When he was allowed in the shelter's communal areas, he moved with a dignified grace that distinguished him from the other dogs. His behavior with the staff was impeccable, responsive to commands, gentle when receiving treats, and always eager to please. "He's perfect," Jessica Chen, the shelter's director, often remarked. "Absolutely perfect." Yet despite his stunning appearance and apparent good behavior, Titan harbored a perplexing secret. He couldn't seem to keep a home. In the 18 months since he had first arrived at Pinecrest, he had been adopted not once, not twice, but an astonishing 7 times. And each time, within weeks of his adoption, he would be returned to the shelter, his new owners looking apologetic, frustrated, or sometimes simply bewildered. The most confusing aspect was that the reasons given for his returns were wildly contradictory. The Jefferson family claimed he was too energetic, constantly pacing and unable to settle down. The very next adopters, the Rodriguezes, complained that he was too lethargic, showing little interest in walks or play. The Whitaker couple said he was excessively vigilant, barking at every sound throughout the night. The Allens brought him back because he didn't bark at all, even when strangers approached their property. "He's too clingy," reported the Nelsons. "He follows me everywhere, even to the bathroom." "He's too independent," countered the Patels. Just a month later, "He doesn't bond with us at all. It's like living with a furry roommate rather than a pet." The 7th adopters, an elderly couple named the Hoffmans, simply said, "He's not what we expected," and offered no further explanation despite Jessica's gentle probing. The shelter staff was completely baffled. How could the same dog elicit such contradictory responses? In the controlled environment of the shelter, Titan was consistently well-behaved. He showed appropriate energy levels, playful during exercise periods, but calm during quieter moments. He barked occasionally, but not excessively. He was affectionate with familiar staff, but maintained appropriate boundaries with strangers. "It's like he becomes a completely different dog when he leaves here," observed Kyle, one of the shelter's long-time volunteers. "Or maybe people are just making excuses because they don't want to tell us the real reason." This suspicion that adopters might be concealing Titan's true behavioral issues had begun to take root among the staff. Perhaps he was destructive when left alone. Maybe he was aggressive toward other animals or children. Possibly he had some troubling habit that people were too embarrassed to mention. Yet post-adoption follow-up calls always started positively. "He's settling in beautifully," they would say 1 week after adoption. "He seems to really love his new home," they would report at the 2-week check-in. And then, invariably, sometime around the 3-week mark, they would call with the news that things aren't working out, and Titan would be on his way back to Pinecrest. After his 7th return, Jessica made a difficult decision. "We need to understand what's happening with "Tighten before we place him again," she announced during a staff meeting. "It's not fair to him or to potential adopters to keep setting everyone up for failure." The shelter had a standard protocol for dogs with behavioral issues, a 3-phase rehabilitation program involving assessment by an animal behaviorist, targeted training to address specific problems, and carefully monitored reintroduction to potential adopters. But Titan's case was unprecedented. Without knowing what problem they were trying to solve, they couldn't implement the standard approach. "I'm going to take him home with me for a week," Jessica decided. "I want to observe him 24/7 in a home environment. Maybe I'll see something. That explains all these returns." The announcement raised eyebrows among the staff. Jessica rarely fostered animals herself. As the director, her schedule was already overwhelmingly full. But everyone understood her determination. Titan had become something of a mascot at Pinecrest, and each return was increasingly demoralizing for the team. They needed answers. That evening, Jessica prepared her modest ranch-style home for Titan's arrival. She lived alone, which would simplify the observation process. Any behavioral issues would be clearly related to Titan himself, rather than complicated by interactions with family members. She set up a comfortable dog bed in the living room, arranged food and water bowls in the kitchen, and secured her backyard fence to ensure there were no escape routes. When she brought Titan home, he entered her house with the same confident composure he showed at the shelter. He inspected each room methodically, sniffing corners and doorways with apparent interest but not overexcitement. He accepted the water she offered, politely inspected his food bowl, though he didn't eat immediately, and settled onto his bed when she indicated he should. "So far, so good," Jessica murmured, watching him closely. "Let's see how the night goes." The evening passed uneventfully. Titan remained relaxed but attentive, occasionally getting up to look out the window or request a brief petting session before returning to his bed. He showed no signs of anxiety, aggression, or any problematic behavior whatsoever. When bedtime came, he followed Jessica to her bedroom and settled on the rug beside her bed without being directed to do so. "You're being suspiciously perfect," she told him with a smile. "What are you hiding, handsome?" Titan merely tilted his head at her, his amber eyes reflecting the dim light from her bedside lamp. Jessica fell asleep quickly, exhausted from a long day at the shelter. She wasn't sure what woke her several hours later, perhaps a subtle sound, or simply the instinctive awareness that something had changed in her environment. Opening her eyes, she was startled to find Titan standing rigidly at the foot of her bed, his ears forward, his body tense and trembling slightly. "Titan," she whispered, sitting up slowly. "What's wrong, boy?" The German Shepherd didn't respond to her voice. His eyes were fixed on the bedroom window, though Jessica could see nothing unusual outside in the moonlit yard. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and as she watched, a low whine escaped his throat, a sound of unmistakable distress. Jessica switched on her lamp, expecting the sudden light to break whatever spell seemed to hold the dog. Instead, Titan began to pace, his nails clicking anxiously on the hardwood floor as he moved in a tight circle. His whine intensified, interrupted occasionally by what sounded almost like human words. Not barking, but a strange vocalization Jessica had never heard from a dog before. "It's okay," she said soothingly, slipping out of bed and approaching him slowly. "Everything's okay, Titan." When she reached out to touch his shoulder, Titan startled violently, spinning toward her with wild eyes that showed no recognition. For a brief, frightening moment, Jessica thought he might bite her, but instead, the German Shepherd dropped to the floor as if his legs had been cut from beneath him, his body flattening in what appeared to be a defensive posture. The sound that came from him then, a high-pitched whimper punctuated by rapid breathing, broke Jessica's heart with its naked terror. "Oh, Titan," she breathed, kneeling beside him but careful not to touch him again. "You're having some kind of episode, aren't you?" Understanding began to dawn. This wasn't ordinary fear or anxiety. This was something more profound, something that had temporarily transported Titan to another place entirely. Jessica had seen similar behavior in shelter dogs rescued from traumatic situations, but never with this intensity. She sat quietly on the floor near him, speaking softly and consistently, not attempting to touch him again. Gradually, over what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Titan's breathing slowed. His eyes began to focus, and the rigid tension in his body softened. Finally, he turned his head toward Jessica, recognition returning to his gaze. When he crawled toward her, belly still low to the ground, but tail offering a hesitant wag, Jessica felt tears spring to her eyes. She allowed him to approach at his own pace until he gently pressed his head against her knee, an apology, a request for comfort, an acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. "It's not your fault," she told him, carefully stroking his head. "And I think I'm starting to understand." The next morning, Jessica arrived at the shelter earlier than usual, Titan calmly walking beside her on a leather leash. She had slept little after the night's disturbing episode, her mind filled with theories and questions. The German Shepherd, conversely, had awakened, seemingly refreshed, with no visible signs of the previous night's distress. He had eaten breakfast with good appetite and responded to her commands with his usual attentiveness, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Morning, Jessica," called Kyle as they entered. He was already at his desk, sorting through the day's adoption appointments. "How was our perfect problem child overnight?" Jessica gestured toward her office, indicating that Kyle should follow her. Once inside, with the door closed, she recounted Titan's nighttime episode in detail, while the German Shepherd settled comfortably on the small bed she kept in her office for occasional canine visitors. "It sounds like a night terror," Kyle suggested. When she finished, "Or maybe some kind of flashback? I've heard about service dogs for veterans experiencing similar symptoms." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Jessica agreed. "This wasn't just ordinary anxiety. It was like he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere frightening. And it would explain the inconsistent reports from adopters. If these episodes happen randomly, some families might experience several in a short period, while others might not see any during their time with him. And people don't know how to handle it," Kyle added. "So they bring him back, but feel uncomfortable explaining, or maybe they don't even understand what they witnessed." Jessica nodded, her eyes drifting to Titan, who was now peacefully asleep on her office dog bed. In the morning light, with his handsome profile and relaxed posture, it was impossible to imagine the trembling, terrified creature he had become. In the darkness, "We need to look deeper into his history," she decided. "What do we actually know about him before he came to us?" Kyle pulled out his tablet and accessed Titan's file. Not much, unfortunately. He was found as a stray in Riversend County, about 40 miles south of here. The animal control officer who brought him in estimated his age at around 2.5 years at that time. He was in good physical condition, already neutered, clearly had some training. No microchip, though, and no one came forward to claim him during the holding period. That's it? Nothing about where he might have come from before becoming a stray? Kyle scrolled through the digital file. Nothing official. But there's a note here from the intake officer. "Dog responds to basic commands in what sounds like German as well as English. Possible military or police training background." Jessica's eyes widened. "German commands? How did we miss that all this time?" "It's just a note, not in the main assessment," Kyle explained. "And we don't typically try German commands with our dogs." "Does Riversend County have any military bases nearby?" Kyle shook his head. "Not that I know of. Fort Carson is about 3 hours from there." Jessica tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. We need to explore this military angle. If Titan was trained for service, or perhaps even combat, that would explain both his excellent behavior and his traumatic episodes. She turned to her computer and began typing. I'm sending an email to some contacts at veteran service organizations. Maybe someone will recognize his description or know of a German shepherd with military training who went missing about 1.5 years ago. While Jessica composed her email, Kyle continued reviewing Titan's file, searching for any other overlooked details. His health checkup when he arrived noted some scarring on his left hindquarters, he reported. The vet thought it might be from an old injury that healed well. No other health issues. What about his behavior assessments? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Perfect scores across the board. Good with other dogs, no food aggression, excellent recall, no sensitivity to loud noises during daytime testing. Kyle paused, looking up from the tablet. But we've never tested him with specific combat-related triggers or at night. We should do that, Jessica decided. Carefully, of course. I don't want to traumatize him, but if we can identify specific triggers, it might help us find the right home for him. Someone who understands his background and can manage his needs. Kyle nodded in agreement. I can reach out to Dr. Matsuda. She specializes in canine PTSD and works with military working dogs. She might be willing to evaluate Titan. Perfect, Jessica said, finishing her email and hitting send. And in the meantime, I'll continue fostering him. I want to observe whether these episodes happen regularly or are triggered by specific circumstances. Throughout the day, Jessica found herself watching Titan with new eyes. Every perfect sit, every alert response to his name, every calm interaction with shelter visitors now seemed like evidence of specialized training rather than just good canine manners. She noticed how he maintained a consistent distance from strangers, friendly but professional, much like a working dog on duty. He showed particular interest in men wearing boots similar to military issue, though he remained perfectly behaved in their presence. During her lunch break, Jessica conducted a small experiment. When no one else was in her office, she clearly enunciated several commands in German. Sits instead of sit, Platz instead of down, bleib instead of stay. A Titan responded instantly to each one, perhaps even more sharply than to the English equivalents. You've been holding out on us, she told him with a small smile. Who trained you, boy, and what happened to separate you from them? By late afternoon, Jessica had received responses to her inquiries, though none provided immediate answers. Dr. Matsuda agreed to evaluate Titan the following week. The veteran service organizations requested more information and photographs, which Jessica promptly provided. One contact suggested reaching out to the military working dog program at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, as they maintained records of service dogs. As Jessica prepared to take Titan home for a second night, Kyle approached her with a printout. I did some research on military working dogs, he said. Specifically German shepherds deployed in combat zones. This article mentions that some develop a condition similar to PTSD, night terrors, hypervigilance, startle responses to specific triggers like certain sounds or smells. Jessica scanned the article with interest. This describes exactly what I witnessed last night. There's more, Kyle continued. Sometimes, when military dogs are separated from their handlers due to injury or other circumstances, they have difficulty adapting to civilian homes. They've been trained to work with a specific person in high-stress environments, and ordinary family life doesn't provide the structure or purpose they're accustomed to. That would explain the complaints about him being both too energetic and too lethargic, Jessica mused. He might be searching for a job to do, a mission to complete. When he doesn't find it, he either keeps looking, pacing, vigilant, or he gives up and withdraws. Exactly, Kyle agreed. The article suggests that these dogs often do best when placed with handlers who understand military training or, ideally, with their original handlers if possible. Jessica's expression turned thoughtful. Finding his original handler would be ideal, but that's a long shot without knowing which branch of service he came from or where he was deployed. True, Kyle acknowledged, but at least we have a direction now. We're looking for someone with military background, preferably with experience handling working dogs. As they finished their conversation, Jessica noticed Titan had moved to the office door, his posture alert but relaxed, clearly indicating he was ready to leave. Even this simple behavior spoke of training beyond what most family pets received, the ability to communicate readiness without whining or scratching at the door. "We'll figure this out," she promised him as they walked to her car. "We'll find you the right home, one where you'll be understood." That night proceeded without incident. Titan slept peacefully through the darkness, occasionally opening his eyes when Jessica checked on him, but showing no signs of distress. In the morning, she found him already awake, sitting patiently beside her bed, waiting for her to rise rather than demanding attention. As they drove back to the shelter, Jessica's phone rang. She answered through her car's Bluetooth system. "Jessica, it's Mark from Valley Veterans Support Network. I received your email about the German Shepherd." "Yes, thank you for calling." "Back," she replied, glancing at Titan in her rearview mirror. The dog's ears had perked up at the sound of the unfamiliar voice. "I shared his photos with some of our members," Mark continued. "No specific matches yet, but several noticed his posture and alertness match what we see in military working dogs. One of our veterans, a former dog handler, suggested checking whether he responds to a tactical communication vest." "A what?" Jessica asked, unfamiliar with the term. "It's a vest some military dogs wear that allows handlers to give commands remotely. They're trained to respond to vibrations in specific patterns. If your dog was trained with one, it might help confirm his background." "That's helpful, thank you," Jessica said. "Would your former handler member be willing to meet Titan? Someone with that expertise might notice things we're missing." "I think that could be arranged," Mark replied. "His name is James Reeves. He served as a dog handler with the Marines in Afghanistan. I'll ask if he's available in the next few days." After ending the call, Jessica felt a surge of optimism. They were making progress, developing a clearer picture of Titan's possible background. With each new piece of information, they moved closer to understanding the mystery of his repeated returns and, hopefully, to finding him the perfect home, one where his special abilities would be assets rather than problems, where his occasional nighttime struggles would be met with understanding rather than confusion. As they arrived at the shelter, Jessica glanced back at Titan, who sat regally in her back seat, his amber eyes alert and intelligent. "We're getting closer to your truth," she told him softly. "Just a little more patience." 3 days after Jessica's initial discovery of Titan's nighttime episode, the shelter was preparing for a special visit. James Reeves, the former Marine dog handler from the Valley Veterans Support Network, had agreed to meet Titan and assess whether the German Shepherd might indeed have a military background. Jessica waited in the shelter's training yard, a spacious, fenced area where dogs could exercise and demonstrate their behaviors in a controlled environment. Titan sat calmly at her side, his posture perfect despite the excitement of shelter volunteers passing by with other dogs. He seemed to understand that this meeting was important, maintaining a dignified stillness that only reinforced Jessica's suspicions about his training. "He certainly carries himself like a working dog," observed Kyle, who had joined them in the yard. "Even compared to the police K9s we occasionally get, there's something different about his focus." Jessica nodded, in agreement. "Dr. Matsuda is coming tomorrow for a full assessment, but I'm hoping Mr. Reeves can give us some immediate insights. If Titan responds to military-specific commands or protocols, it would confirm what we're suspecting. At precisely 10 o'clock, a shelter assistant escorted a man through the side gate into the training yard. James Reeves moved with deliberate precision, his gait slightly uneven due to a prosthetic right leg visible below his khaki shorts. He was in his early 30s, with close-cropped dark hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent significant time in harsh sunlight. His expression was serious, but not unfriendly as he approached, his eyes immediately focused on Titan rather than the humans. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reeves," Jessica said, extending her hand. "I'm Jessica Chen, the shelter director." "James is fine," he replied, shaking her hand briefly before returning his attention to the German Shepherd. "And this must be the dog in question." "Yes, this is Titan." James didn't immediately move closer or attempt to touch the dog. Instead, he observed Titan from several feet away, noting his posture, eye contact, and overall demeanor. Titan, for his part, watched the visitor with evident interest, but maintained his position at Jessica's side. "May I?" James asked, gesturing to indicate he wanted to approach the dog. "Of course," Jessica replied, releasing her light hold on Titan's leash to allow the interaction. James moved forward slowly, his approach neither hesitant nor threatening. When he reached Titan, he didn't immediately pet him as most visitors would. Instead, he stood quietly, allowing the German Shepherd to process his presence and scent. After a moment, James spoke, not to the humans, but directly to Titan, in a firm, clear voice that carried a subtle shift in cadence. "Inspection," he said, the word clearly a command rather than a conversational statement. Titan's response was immediate and startling. He rose from his sitting position and circled James, moving with deliberate precision as he sniffed the man's legs, torso, and hands in what appeared to be a systematic pattern. After completing the circuit, Titan returned to his original position and sat, looking up expectantly at James. "Good boy," James said quietly. He looked at Jessica, his expression now showing clear emotion. "He's definitely military trained. That was a standard search protocol, checking a friendly for injuries or hidden threats, not something a civilian dog would know." Jessica felt a surge of validation. "We suspected as much. He responds to German commands as well." James nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to Titan. He issued several commands in rapid succession, some in English, others in German, and a few accompanied by hand signals only. Titan responded to each with perfect precision, demonstrating a level of training far beyond basic obedience. "He's not just military," James said finally, a note of awe entering his voice. "He's special operations. This level of training is specific to dogs deployed with elite units. These aren't the commands we're used with regular military working dogs." The revelation sent a ripple of excitement through Jessica. "Special operations, like Navy SEALs or Army Rangers." "Possibly," James confirmed. "Or Marine Raiders, Green Berets, any of the special forces units that deploy with K9 team members. These dogs receive thousands of hours of specialized training. They're considered full military personnel, not just equipment." Kyle, who had been observing silently, spoke up. "Would that explain the nighttime episodes Jessica witnessed? Some kind of combat-related stress?" James turned to Jessica with increased interest. "You've seen episodes? What kind?" Jessica described in detail what she had observed during her first night with Titan. The rigid posture, the trembling, the dissociative state where he seemed to be experiencing something none of the humans could see. "It was like he was somewhere else entirely," she concluded. "Somewhere frightening." A shadow passed over James's face. "I've seen that before, in dogs and in people. We call it a flashback, a moment when the brain can't distinguish between memory and present reality." He knelt beside Titan, gently, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. "What did you see, buddy? What are you remembering?" The tenderness in the former handler's voice revealed a deep understanding of what Titan might be experiencing. It wasn't just professional knowledge, but personal empathy that informed his response. "Do you think he was injured in combat?" Jessica asked, recalling the scarring the vet had noted on Titan's initial examination. James conducted his own careful inspection of the German Shepherd, running trained hands over the dog's body and examining the areas where fur covered old injuries. "There's definitely some scarring consistent with shrapnel or debris wounds," he confirmed. "Not severe enough to end his service necessarily, but significant. The real question is how he ended up separated from his handler and unit." The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Special operations dogs were valuable military assets, not easily lost or abandoned. Something significant must have occurred to break the bond between Titan and his handler. Could his handler have been killed in action? Kyle asked quietly. Voicing the somber possibility, James's expression grew grave. "It's possible. When handlers are killed, their dogs often experience severe trauma. Some can eventually work with new handlers, but others... The bond is too strong. They need to be retired." He paused, considering. "But in those cases, there's usually a protocol. The dog would be officially discharged, documented, often adopted by the handler's family or another military member. They don't just disappear." "Could he have been stolen?" Jessica suggested. "Or maybe his handler is alive, but was injured and separated from him." "Both are possibilities," James acknowledged. "The fact that he was found as a stray suggests something interrupted the normal process. Whatever happened, it left this dog in limbo, trained for a purpose he can no longer fulfill, bonded to someone who's no longer present." The explanation brought clarity to Titan's pattern of failed adoptions. Ordinary families, however well-intentioned, couldn't provide what a special operations dog needed: the structure, purpose, and understanding of his unique capabilities and challenges. "What now?" Jessica asked. "How do we find the right home for him?" James stood, wincing slightly, as he adjusted his prosthetic leg. "I have some contacts in the military working dog community. If you'll allow me to take some photos and videos of him performing specific tasks, I can distribute them through our networks. Someone might recognize him." "Of course," Jessica agreed readily. "Anything that might help identify his origins." For the next hour, James worked with Titan, putting him through a series of exercises designed to showcase his specialized training. The German Shepherd responded with evident enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the opportunity to use skills that had lain dormant during his time at the shelter and in various adoptive homes. He demonstrated an ability to detect hidden objects, differentiate between threatening and non-threatening individuals based on subtle cues, and maintain focus despite significant distractions. "He's extraordinary," James said when they had finished. "One of the best trained dogs I've ever encountered. His handler must have been exceptional." As they walked back toward the shelter building, James clarified what would happen next. "I'll send these recordings through our networks, veteran groups, military working dog programs, handlers I know personally. If his handler is alive, there's a good chance word will reach them. If not, we might at least identify his unit or training program." "And if we can't find his original handler?" Jessica asked. "Then we look for someone with the right background to understand what he needs," James replied. "Preferably another handler or someone with experience working with military dogs. He needs structure, purpose, and someone who understands that his nighttime episodes aren't a defect. They're a natural response to what he's experienced." Before leaving, James knelt once more beside Titan, looking directly into the German Shepherd's intelligent eyes. "We'll figure this out, warrior," he promised softly. "We'll find where you belong." As Jessica watched the interaction, she felt a surge of hope. For the first time since Titan had begun his cycle of adoptions and returns, she could envision a successful outcome. Not just a home, but the right home, with someone who truly understood what made this extraordinary dog both challenging and special. "Thank you," she said to James as he prepared to leave, "for your service and for helping us understand Titan better." James nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Military working dogs save countless lives. They deserve our best efforts when they come home." He paused at the gate, looking back at Titan. "I have a feeling his story isn't over yet. It might just be entering a new chapter." After James departed, Jessica returned to her office with Titan at her heel. The German Shepherd seemed energized by the morning's activities, his step lighter and his eyes brighter than she had previously observed. The opportunity to demonstrate his specialized skills had clearly been stimulating for him in a way that ordinary shelter activities were not. "You've been hiding your light under a bushel, haven't you?" she murmured to him as they entered her office. "All this time, we've been treating you like a pet, when you're really a soldier." Titan looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Jessica could almost believe he understood every word. Perhaps he did. His training would certainly include recognizing hundreds, if not thousands, of distinct terms and phrases. As she settled at her desk to document the morning's discoveries, Jessica found herself reflecting on the parallels between Titan's situation and those of many veterans returning from combat. The difficulty transitioning to civilian life, the specialized skills that didn't always translate to everyday environments, the memories that sometimes intruded into the present. Titan's experience mirrored the human experience in profound ways. "We'll find your person," she promised him as he settled onto his office bed. "Whether it's your original handler or someone new who understands you, we'll make sure you're not alone with these memories anymore." The morning after James Reeves's visit, Dr. Matsuda arrived at Pinecrest Animal Shelter to conduct her professional assessment of Titan. Dr. Kaori Matsuda was a veterinary behaviorist who specialized in trauma and stress disorders in working animals, particularly those with military or police backgrounds. Her diminutive stature and soft-spoken manner belied her expertise and the respect she commanded in her field. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Jessica greeted her, leading the specialist to the private training room they had prepared for the evaluation. "I was intrigued by your description," Dr. Matsuda replied. "Cases like this are relatively rare in civilian shelter settings. Most military working dogs have tracking systems in place to prevent them from ending up as strays." Jessica nodded in agreement. "That's part of what makes Titan's case so unusual. We've been trying to piece together how a dog with his level of training could have fallen through the cracks of military protocols." "Where is our subject now?" Dr. Matsuda asked, setting down her equipment bag and removing a tablet. "Kyle is bringing him from my office. I've been fostering him since we discovered his nighttime episodes." As if on cue, the door opened and Kyle entered with Titan walking perfectly at heel beside him. Dr. Matsuda's eyes narrowed slightly as she observed the German Shepherd's movement and posture. "Interesting," she murmured. "His carriage is distinctive. Military working dogs develop specific muscle patterns from their training regimens." She turned to Jessica. "May I work with him alone initially? Some of the assessment protocols are more effective without the presence of people he's bonded with." "Of course," Jessica agreed. "Kyle and I will be in my office when you're finished." For the next 2 hours, Jessica attempted to focus on administrative tasks while waiting for Dr. Matsuda's assessment, but her thoughts continually returned to Titan. The revelations of the past few days had transformed her understanding of the German Shepherd's situation. What had initially seemed like a behavioral mystery was evolving into something more complex, a story of displacement and interrupted purpose. When her office phone finally rang, Jessica answered immediately. "We've finished the initial assessment," Dr. Matsuda informed her. "Could you join us in the training room?" Upon entering the training room, Jessica found Titan lying calmly on a mat while Dr. Matsuda made notes on her tablet. The German Shepherd acknowledged Jessica's arrival with alert eyes, but remained in position until Dr. Matsuda quietly said, "Release." His response to structured commands is exceptional. The specialist began without preamble. "I conducted several standard assessments for combat-trained canines, and his performance confirms what your veteran contact suggested yesterday. This dog has received elite training consistent with special operations deployment. Were you able to identify specific triggers for his nighttime episodes?" Jessica asked. Dr. Matsuda nodded. "I used controlled exposure techniques to test various stimuli. He shows measurable stress responses to certain sounds, particularly low-flying helicopters, specific types of explosions, and the distinctive clatter of certain weapons. There's also an interesting trigger related to sandstorms. The sound of wind-blown sand against fabric creates an immediate vigilance response." "Sandstorms," Jessica repeated. "That might narrow down where he was deployed. It suggests Middle East or possibly North African deployment, yes. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all would be consistent with his trigger profile." Dr. Matsuda paused, consulting her notes. "There's something else quite interesting. He displays what we call phantom handler behavior, periodic checking for commands from someone who isn't present. Now, what does that mean exactly? Military working dogs, especially those in special operations, form profound bonds with their handlers. The connection goes beyond traditional obedience. It becomes a partnership, almost a neural link. When that bond is suddenly severed, the dog sometimes continues to check for cues from the absent handler. I observed Titan occasionally turning his head slightly to the right and pausing, as if listening for instructions from someone standing in that position. The revelation was both fascinating and heartbreaking. Jessica glanced at Titan, trying to imagine the disorientation he must feel, trained to function as half of a team, now operating alone in environments that made no sense to him. "Would that explain the contradictory behaviors reported by his adopters?" she asked. "Some said he was too vigilant, others that he was too detached." Dr. Matsuda considered this. "It's likely part of the explanation. In some environments, he may be actively searching for his handler or attempting to perform remembered duties. In others, when he recognizes there's no mission to complete, he might shut down, a state similar to depression in humans. Both are common responses in displaced working dogs. So what's your professional recommendation?" Jessica asked, getting to the heart of the matter. "Can he be successfully placed in a civilian home?" The specialist was thoughtful before responding. "With the right placement, yes. But right is very specific in this case. He needs someone who understands his background, who can provide structure and purpose, and who won't misinterpret his trauma responses as behavioral problems." She paused. Ideally, finding his original handler would be the optimal solution. The bond between special operations handlers and their canine partners is uniquely strong. "We're working on that," Jessica informed her. "James Reeves is circulating Titan's information through veteran networks, but we don't know if his handler is even alive or in a position to reclaim him. Then your backup plan should be placement with someone from a similar background. Another handler or special operations veteran, preferably someone familiar with the specific theater where Titan likely served." Dr. Matsuda began packing her equipment. I can provide a detailed report of my findings, including specific recommendations for managing his stress responses and rehabilitative protocols. That would be extremely helpful, Jessica said gratefully. We want to get this right. He's been through enough transitions already. After Dr. Matsuda departed, Jessica returned to her office with Titan, her mind processing the new information. The specialist's assessment had confirmed their suspicions while adding layers of complexity to their understanding of the German Shepherd's needs. The phantom handler behavior particularly struck her, the idea of Titan continuously looking for someone who wasn't there, like a person habitually reaching for a missing limb. She was updating Titan's file with notes from Dr. Matsuda's preliminary findings when her office phone rang again. It was the front desk. "Jessica, there's someone here asking about Titan," the receptionist informed her. "Mr. Reeves is back and he's brought someone with him." Surprised by James's quick return, Jessica rose from her desk. "I'll be right out. Please show them to the visitor room." With Titan following closely, Jessica made her way to the shelter's private meeting room, used for sensitive conversations with potential adopters or those surrendering animals. Through the small window in the door, she could see James Reeves sitting with another man whose back was to her. When she entered, James stood immediately, an unusual energy in his normally composed demeanor. "Jessica, thank you for seeing us without an appointment. This is Sergeant Michael Vega. He served with the Marine Special Operations Command." The other man rose, turning to face her. He was tall and lean, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years in harsh environments. A prominent scar ran from his right temple down to his jawline, partially hidden by a closely trimmed beard. But it was his eyes that captured Jessica's attention. Dark and intense, they moved immediately from her face to the German Shepherd at her side. The moment Titan saw the visitor, everything changed. The German Shepherd froze, his entire body becoming rigidly alert. A high-pitched whine escaped him, not of distress, but something Jessica had never heard from him before. Then, before anyone could react, Titan lunged forward, not aggressively, but with such sudden force that the leash slipped from Jessica's grasp. "Titan, wait!" she began, alarmed by the unexpected behavior. But what happened next left her speechless. The German Shepherd raced to the stranger and literally leaped into his arms. All 85 pounds of military-trained canine launching into an embrace that would have knocked down anyone not braced for impact. Michael Vega, however, caught the dog with practiced ease, staggering back only slightly as Titan's paws landed on his shoulders. "Shadow," the man said, his voice breaking on the word. "Shadow, is it really you?" The German Shepherd was making sounds Jessica had never heard from him, half bark, half howl, punctuated by whimpers of what could only be described as joy. His entire body trembled as he pressed against the man's chest, trying to get closer despite the physical impossibility of doing so. "Shadow," Jessica repeated, confused by the unfamiliar name. James cleared his throat, visibly moved by the reunion unfolding before them. "His real name is Shadow," he explained. "He was Sergeant Vega's partner in Afghanistan. They were separated 18 months ago during an operation that went wrong." Michael Vega seemed barely aware of the others. In the room, he had sunk to his knees, arms wrapped around the German Shepherd, who was frantically licking his face, whining and pressing against him with desperate affection. "I thought you were dead," he was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "They told me you didn't make it out." Jessica exchanged a look with James, who motioned for her to join him at the far side of the room, giving Michael and Shadow, not Titan, some privacy for their reunion. "I sent the videos and photos through our networks yesterday," James explained, quietly. "Mike saw them this morning. He contacted me immediately." He's been stationed at Fort Carson for rehabilitation after being wounded in the same operation where Shadow was lost. He thought his dog was dead? Jessica asked, watching the emotional scene continue to unfold. James nodded solemnly. Their unit was ambushed. Mike was critically injured, spent months in military hospitals. Shadow was reported killed in action, along with 2 other team members, but apparently he survived somehow, Jessica finished, and ended up as a stray 40 miles south of here. Military working dogs are trained to return to base or find help if separated from their handlers. My guess is Shadow was injured, but not killed, regained consciousness after the unit had been evacuated, and tried to make his way back. Somehow he ended up in civilian territory, perhaps trying to find Mike. The explanation made perfect sense. A trained military dog, separated from his handler and unit, would do everything in his power to complete his mission and return. Knowing his handler had been evacuated to a military hospital thousands of miles away, Shadow would have continued searching, eventually becoming the stray found in Riversend County. Across the room, Michael was examining his partner more carefully now, running trained hands over the dog's body and checking the areas where scars had formed. "You took some hits too, didn't you, boy?" he was saying, his voice gentler than his appearance would suggest. "But you kept going, you didn't give up." Jessica approached carefully, not wanting to intrude on the reunion, but needing to understand the situation fully. "Sergeant Vega, I'm Jessica Chen, the shelter director. I can't tell you how amazing it is to witness this. We've been trying to solve the mystery of Ty, Shadow's behavior, for months." Michael looked up, seeming to fully notice her for the first time. "You kept him safe," he said simply. "Thank you for that." "He's been through 7 adoptions," Jessica explained. "He kept getting returned because people didn't understand his needs. We finally realized he had military training, but we never imagined we'd find his actual handler." A shadow passed over Michael's face. 7 families. He must have been so confused. He turned back to Shadow, who had settled somewhat, but remained pressed against his side, as if afraid his handler might disappear again. "I've been through my own version of that. Shuffled between medical facilities, rehab centers, different units. Neither of us knew where the other was." The shelter's conference room had transformed into a space of healing as Michael and Shadow's reunion continued to unfold. Jessica had brought in water for both man and dog, while Kyle arrived with the German Shepherd's file and medical records. "I still can't believe you're alive," Michael said, his hand never leaving Shadow's fur as he reviewed the documentation Kyle had provided. The official report listed you as KIA, killed in action. There was even a memorial service at the base. Shadow remained pressed against his handler's side, occasionally nudging Michael's hand or arm, as if reassuring himself that this reunion was real. The dog's transformation was remarkable. The dignified, somewhat reserved German shepherd they had known as Titan had become expressive and animated, his entire demeanor reflecting profound joy and relief. "We'd like to understand what happened," Jessica said gently, "both for our records and to help prevent similar situations with other military working dogs. Would you be willing to share how you were separated?" Michael nodded slowly, his eyes distant as he collected his thoughts. "It was during an operation in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Our team was conducting a reconnaissance mission in a mountainous area known for insurgent activity." He paused, absently running his finger along the scar on his face. "We were ambushed, heavy gunfire, explosives. Communications went down almost immediately." Shadow's ears flicked at the mention of the location, as if the name itself triggered memories. Michael noticed and placed a calming hand on the dog's head. Shadow detected the threat before anyone else did. He always had better senses than our equipment. He alerted, but we had only seconds to react. Michael's voice remained steady, though the effort it cost him was evident. He was working ahead of me, checking a ravine for explosives. The first blast hit between us. I was thrown back against a rock outcropping, sustained multiple injuries. Jessica and Kyle listened silently, understanding that this might be the first time Michael had recounted these events in detail. My last memory is of Shadow running toward me through the smoke. Then nothing until I woke up in a military hospital in Germany 3 days later. They told me 2 team members were killed, and Shadow was presumed dead as well. The extraction had been chaotic, under continued fire. There hadn't been time or resources to recover his body. But he survived, Kyle observed quietly. Somehow, Michael agreed, looking down at his partner with a mixture of pride and lingering disbelief. Based on his injuries, he must have been caught in a secondary explosion or debris. But military working dogs are trained to evade capture if separated from their handlers. He would have gone into survival mode, hiding during the day, moving at night, avoiding populated areas. That's consistent with where he was found, Jessica noted, checking the intake records. The animal control officer who picked him up reported he was in a remote area outside Riversend, thin but not emaciated, and initially wary of approach. He surrendered only when offered food and shown non-threatening behavior. James Reeves, who had been listening quietly, joined the conversation. Military working dogs are also trained to seek out American uniforms or English speakers if they need assistance. He might have been gradually working his way toward populated areas, looking for someone who could help him find his handler. The theory made sense. Shadow's training, combined with survival instinct, would have kept him alive in the wilderness while he searched for a way back to his unit or handler. After I was stabilized in Germany, I was transferred to Walter Reed for surgeries, then to a rehabilitation facility in Texas, Michael explained. I've only been at Fort Carson for 4 months. 3 of those were spent in the Warrior Transition Unit, focused on physical therapy. His hand moved unconsciously to his left leg, which Jessica now noticed had the slight rigidity of a sophisticated prosthetic beneath his jeans. They told me I was lucky to keep the other leg. Shadow seemed to sense the shift in his handler's emotions, pressing closer and placing his head on Michael's knee. The gesture was both protective and comforting, a reminder of the deep bond formed between handler and dog in the crucible of combat deployment. "What happens now?" Jessica asked, addressing the practical question that hung unspoken in the room. Legally, who has claim to Shadow at this point? James answered before Michael could. Military working dogs are considered personnel, not equipment. If Shadow was officially listed as KIA, he was essentially given a posthumous discharge from service. Since he's alive, the military would have to reassess his status. Would they take him back? Kyle asked, concern evident in his voice. The story of Shadow's survival and reunion with Michael had affected everyone in the room, creating an unexpected emotional investment in the outcome. Not likely, James replied. Given his age, the trauma he's experienced, and his presumed death already being processed, the paperwork to reinstate him would be prohibitive. In cases like this, the military generally defers to the handler's wishes, assuming the handler is in a position to provide appropriate care. All eyes turned to Michael, who had been listening intently to the discussion of Shadow's fate. "I want him back," he said without hesitation. "He's my partner. We were deployed together for 3 years before the ambush. He saved my life more times than I can count." He paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "But my situation is complicated. I'm still in the Warrior Transition Unit, living in military housing while completing my medical retirement process. I'm not sure if my current accommodations allow for a dog his size. There are exceptions for service animals, James pointed out, and given Shadow's training and your history together, he would qualify as a service dog with minimal additional certification. A service dog? Michael repeated, considering the idea. Many veterans with PTSD or physical disabilities work with service dogs, James explained. Shadow already has the training foundation. He would just need specific task training related to your particular needs. Given your shared combat experiences, he might actually be uniquely qualified to support your recovery. The suggestion created a subtle shift in the dynamic, transforming the reunion from one of handler and military working dog to something potentially more mutual, a partnership where each could help heal the other's wounds. Jessica, sensing the significance of this moment, spoke carefully. Our primary concern is Shadow's well-being, which now clearly includes his relationship with you. If you're committed to reclaiming him, we want to support that process in whatever way we can. I am absolutely committed, Michael affirmed, his hand instinctively moving to the dog's head. Shadow leaned into the touch, eyes half closing in contentment. But I need to make sure I can provide properly for him. I won't put him through another disruption or failed placement. The responsibility in his words impressed Jessica. Despite the emotion of their reunion, Michael was thinking practically about Shadow's needs, the mark of a true handler who put his partner's welfare above his own feelings. What if we approach this gradually, she suggested. Shadow could remain officially in our care while you sort out the housing and service dog certification issues. You could visit him daily, take him for training sessions and outings, rebuild your working relationship. Once your situation stabilizes, we complete the formal adoption. Michael considered the proposal. That could work. I have physical therapy 3 mornings a week, but my afternoons are generally free, and having a purpose, a reason to push. Harder in rehab. He looked down at Shadow. That would make a difference. I can help with the service dog certification process, James offered. There are several organizations that specialize in transitioning military working dogs to service animals for their handlers. They could provide guidance on the specific tasks Shadow could perform based on your needs. For the first time since his arrival, a genuine smile transformed Michael's serious expression. So we'd be working together again, he said to Shadow. Different mission, same team. The German Shepherd seemed to understand perfectly, his intelligent eyes fixed on his handler's face, his posture reflecting readiness for whatever task might be assigned. There's one more thing, Jessica said, remembering Dr. Matsuda's assessment. Shadow has been experiencing what appear to be trauma responses, particularly at night. Episodes similar to flashbacks or night terrors. Dr. Matsuda, the behavioral specialist who evaluated him, believes they're related to his combat experiences. Michael nodded, unsurprised. That makes sense. We went through some intense situations together. Dogs process trauma differently than humans, but they definitely experience it. He thought for a moment. I've had my own versions of those. Episodes during recovery. Maybe that's something else we can help each other with. The idea that handler and dog might support each other through similar psychological challenges added another dimension to their reunion. Both had survived the same traumatic events. Both carried physical and invisible scars, and both had experienced the disorientation of separation and displacement. Together, they might find healing that neither could achieve alone. I should probably head back to base, Michael said after they had discussed logistics for the transition period. I need to speak with my commanding officer and the housing office about accommodations for Shadow, and my next PT session is scheduled for Tomorrow morning. As he prepared to leave, Shadow became visibly anxious, moving to block the door and looking up at Michael with clear distress. The German Shepherd, who had maintained perfect composure through all his shelter stays and adoptions, was now openly afraid of being separated from his handler again. Michael knelt despite the obvious discomfort it caused his injured leg. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, taking the dog's face between his hands. "I'm coming back tomorrow, I promise." Shadow whined, unconvinced. "I've got an idea," Jessica said, moved by the dog's distress. "Let me get something from my office." She returned moments later with one of Michael's shirts, which he had removed earlier when demonstrating to Kyle how Shadow could detect specific injuries through clothing. "Take this with you," she said, handing it to Michael. "Wear it today, sleep in it tonight, bring it back tomorrow. We'll leave it with Shadow while you're gone." Michael understood immediately. So he has my scent, proof that I'm still here, even when he can't see me. He put the shirt on over his t-shirt, allowing his scent to further impregnate the fabric. After a few minutes, he removed it and carefully folded it, placing it where Shadow could see. "This stays here with you, buddy, and I'll be back tomorrow." The simple solution seemed to reassure the German Shepherd. While still clearly reluctant to see Michael leave, he allowed it without further displays of anxiety, lying down beside the shirt his handler had worn. As Jessica walked Michael and James to the shelter entrance, she felt a profound sense of witnessing something extraordinary, a partnership forged in the most challenging circumstances, severed by violence, and now miraculously restored against overwhelming odds. "Thank you," Michael said as they reached the door, not just for caring for him, but for not giving up on finding answers when it would have been easier to label him as problematic and move on. "That's our commitment to every animal," Jessica replied sincerely. "But I have to admit, Shadow's case has been special from the beginning, even before we understood why." As Michael departed with James, Jessica returned to the conference room where Kyle was sitting quietly with Shadow. The German Shepherd had placed his head on the folded shirt, his eyes fixed on the door through which his handler had disappeared. "He'll be back," Jessica assured the dog softly. "And this time, you'll know exactly where to find him." True to his word, Michael returned to Pinecrest Animal Shelter at precisely 1 o'clock the following afternoon. Jessica watched from the reception area as Shadow's demeanor transformed the moment his handler walked through the door. The German Shepherd had been alert but calm while waiting in Jessica's office, occasionally sniffing the shirt Michael had left behind. Now, at the sound of familiar footsteps, he stood at attention, his entire body vibrating with anticipation. "He knew you were coming before you even entered the building," Jessica remarked as she led Michael to her office. "His hearing is extraordinary. Military working dogs are selected for exceptional sensory abilities," Michael explained. "Shadow can distinguish my footsteps from anyone else's, even in a crowded environment. It was a crucial skill during deployments." When Jessica opened her office door, Shadow greeted his handler with controlled enthusiasm, not the frantic reunion of the previous day, but a dignified joy that spoke of the professional relationship they had developed through years of working together. Michael acknowledged the greeting with equal respect, kneeling briefly to make eye contact with his partner before rising to discuss the day's plans with Jessica. "I spoke with my commanding officer this morning," he reported. "He's supportive of the service dog arrangement and has initiated the paperwork for appropriate housing accommodations. In the meantime, he's authorized daily visits and training sessions." "That's excellent news," Jessica replied. "Dr. Matsuda provided her full assessment report this morning. She recommends a gradual reintegration process rather than an immediate transition, building up the time you spend together while maintaining the stability of his current routine." Michael nodded in agreement. "That makes sense. Military working dogs thrive on routine and clear expectations. Too much change, too, quickly could be destabilizing, even positive change. They settled on a plan. Michael would visit daily, initially taking Shadow for structured walks and training sessions on the shelter grounds, gradually extending to longer outings in various environments. Throughout, Shadow would continue to stay at Jessica's home at night, maintaining the stability he had established there while reacclimatizing to Michael's presence and commands. "I brought something that might help," Michael said, removing a small object from his pocket. It was a tactical communication device, a specialized collar attachment that allowed handlers to send subtle vibration signals to their canine partners from a distance. "We used this during operations where verbal commands weren't possible. It might help re-establish our working communication." Jessica watched with interest as Michael fitted the device to Shadow's collar. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still, clearly familiar with the equipment and its significance. When Michael stepped back and activated a silent command, Shadow immediately performed a precise perimeter check of the office before returning to his handler's side. "Remarkable," Jessica murmured. "His muscle memory for these protocols is completely intact, even after 18 months. These behaviors are ingrained through thousands of repetitions," Michael explained. "For Shadow, responding to the tactical signals is as natural as breathing." He demonstrated several more commands, each executed flawlessly by the German Shepherd. "This will give him security too, knowing that we can communicate clearly again, that he can understand exactly what's expected." For the remainder of the afternoon, Jessica observed as Michael and Shadow re-established their working relationship. They began in the shelter's training yard, with basic obedience exercises that evolved into more complex scenarios, simulating the detection and alert work they had performed during deployment. Throughout, Michael maintained a perfect balance of authority and affection, providing clear direction while acknowledging each successful completion with quiet praise and occasional physical rewards. A brief touch to Shadow's flank or scratch behind his ears. Most striking to Jessica was the transformation in both man and dog. Shadow, who had always carried himself with dignity, now moved with heightened purpose and confidence. His occasional hesitations, which she had previously attributed to his naturally cautious temperament, were replaced by decisive action. He wasn't just responding to commands. He was anticipating needs, reading subtle cues in Michael's posture and expression that were invisible to anyone else. Michael's transformation was equally remarkable. The guarded, somewhat tense veteran who had arrived the previous day had given way to a more fluid, confident presence. His movements became smoother as he worked with Shadow, the slight favoring of his prosthetic leg less noticeable as he found his rhythm in the familiar dance of handler and working dog. When he spoke to Shadow, his voice carried a natural authority that required no volume or harshness, just clear direction infused with absolute trust in his partner's abilities. "He never gave up on you," Jessica observed as they took a break, allowing Shadow to rest in the shade. "All those failed adoptions, he was looking for you in every home." Michael nodded, his expression reflective. "And I never stopped looking for him in my own way. After they told me he was killed, I requested the mission reports, the extraction details. Something didn't add up. There was no physical evidence, no confirmed sighting of his body, but my inquiries kept hitting walls. Eventually, my medical team suggested I focus on my own recovery instead of what they saw as denial." "What would have happened if you hadn't seen James's message?" Jessica asked, considering how close they had come to missing this reunion entirely. "I would have continued searching," Michael said without hesitation. "Once my medical retirement is complete, I had plans to return to Afghanistan, to the area where we were separated. It might sound irrational, but I couldn't accept that he was gone without proof." The depth of Michael's commitment struck Jessica as profoundly moving. Both handler and dog had refused to abandon hope, each in their own way continuing to search for the other, despite all evidence suggesting their separation was permanent. "You know," Michael continued, watching Shadow, who had positioned himself to maintain sightlines to both his handler and the shelter entrance, "working dogs aren't supposed to be just tools or equipment to their handlers. We're trained to maintain professional distance, to remember their military assets, but the reality in the field is different. You depend on each other for survival. You learn to communicate without words. You develop a connection that goes beyond training." Jessica thought of the night terror she had witnessed, Shadow locked in a memory of combat, momentarily unreachable through ordinary means. Dr. Matsuda mentioned that Shadow displays phantom handler behavior, turning to check for commands from someone who isn't there. "I'm guessing that someone was you." Michael's expression softened. "That's standard protocol for our teams. The dog maintains positioning where they can receive visual signals from the handler. Shadow was always exceptional at maintaining that awareness, even in chaotic environments." He paused, watching his partner with evident pride. "What amazes me is that he continued the behavior even after we were separated, like he never accepted that I was gone either." As the afternoon progressed, they moved their session beyond the shelter grounds, taking a careful walk through the quiet neighborhood surrounding Pinecrest. Shadow maintained perfect heel position alongside Michael, his attention divided between his handler and their environment, alert but not anxious, vigilant but controlled. Several passers-by noticed the striking pair, some stopping to ask questions about the handsome German Shepherd. Jessica observed how Michael handled these interactions with diplomatic ease, neither inviting extended conversations nor dismissing people rudely. Shadow, following his handler's lead, remained politely aloof with strangers, accepting brief acknowledgement but maintaining his working focus. "You mentioned service dog certification," Michael said as they returned to the shelter. "What would that process involve?" "James is connecting us with a program specifically for veterans and their service dogs," Jessica explained. "They'll evaluate Shadow's existing skills and help identify specific tasks he can perform to assist with your particular needs. His military training provides an exceptional foundation. The certification process would focus on transitioning those skills to civilian support functions." "Like what?" Michael asked, clearly intrigued by the concept. "It depends on your specific requirements. For veterans with PTSD, service dogs can be trained to perform perimeter checks of homes or new environments, providing security reassurance. They can create physical space between their handler and crowds, interrupt nightmare cycles, or alert to increasing anxiety before the handler is consciously aware of it." Jessica paused, observing how Shadow had positioned himself on Michael's left side, the side with the prosthetic leg. For physical disabilities, they can offer mobility support, retrieve objects, or provide bracing assistance. Michael glanced down at Shadow, who was already naturally performing some of these functions without specific civilian service dog training. "He's been compensating for my left side since we started walking. I didn't even notice I was favoring it until I saw him adjusting his position." "That's the remarkable thing about your partnership," Jessica noted. "You already have the foundation that most service dog teams spend months or years developing. It's just a matter of refocusing existing skills towards civilian needs rather than combat objectives." By late afternoon, they had established a plan for the coming weeks. Michael would visit daily, gradually increasing the duration and complexity of their outings. Shadow would continue staying with Jessica at night, with the eventual goal of transitioning to Michael's new housing once it was approved. They would begin service dog certification training the following week, with James facilitating the connection to the veteran program. As they prepared to part for the day, Jessica noticed Shadow's mounting tension, subtle shifts in his posture and breathing that signaled increasing anxiety about the impending separation. "The nights are hardest for him," she informed Michael. "That's when his stress responses typically manifest. Having your shirt helped last night, but it might be good to establish a more formal departure routine, something that clearly communicates you're coming back." Michael considered this, then reached for the tactical communication device attached to Shadow's collar. He adjusted several settings before kneeling to address his partner directly. "Shadow, hold position," he commanded firmly but gently. "I will return at 1300 hours tomorrow. Maintain security with Handler Chen until then. Understood?" The German shepherd's posture shifted subtly, his anxiety visibly giving way to the comfort of clear instructions and expectations. He responded with a soft noise that was neither whine nor bark, but seemed to communicate acknowledgement. "The device is set to emit a periodic signal," Michael explained to Jessica as he rose. "It's a pattern we used during extended operations when we had to be separated. It means handler returning, maintain position." It might help remind him that our separation is temporary. The thoughtfulness of the approach impressed Jessica, addressing Shadow's anxiety not by simply offering comfort, but by providing structure and purpose that respected his training and capabilities. It was a reminder that this was no ordinary dog-owner relationship being rebuilt, but a specialized partnership forged in circumstances most civilians could barely imagine. "We're making progress," Jessica said encouragingly as she walked Michael to the shelter entrance. "Today was a good first step." Michael nodded in agreement, though his expression remained serious. The real test will be the transition back to living together full-time. Both of us have changed in the past 18 months. I'm not the same handler he knew, and he's had experiences I wasn't part of. But the foundation is still there, Jessica observed. "I saw it today in how you work together. Some connections go deeper than circumstance or time apart." As Michael departed with a promise to return the following day, Jessica rejoined Shadow, who was waiting patiently by her office door. The German shepherd's attention remained fixed on the direction his handler had gone, but the frantic anxiety of yesterday's separation had been replaced by disciplined waiting, a soldier following orders rather than a dog abandoned. "He's coming. Back," Jessica assured him gently, "and this time neither of you has to search alone." The first week of Michael and Shadow's reunification progressed with promising developments. Each day at precisely 1 p.m., Michael arrived at the shelter for their scheduled session, and each day Shadow greeted him with increasing confidence, the initial anxiety about separation gradually giving way to trust in the established routine. By the 5th day, they had established a smooth rhythm to their sessions. They began with basic obedience exercises in the training yard, transitioned to more complex tasks that utilized Shadow's specialized training, and concluded with increasingly adventurous outings into the surrounding community. Jessica accompanied them initially, but as their confidence grew, she began allowing them private time to rebuild their unique connection. On Thursday afternoon, Jessica received a call from Michael, his voice carrying an excitement she hadn't heard before. "We've been approved for the Veterans Service Dog Program," he announced. "They've reviewed Shadow's background and my medical situation, and they want to begin specialized training next Monday. Usually, there's a waiting list of months, but given our unique circumstances and Shadow's existing training, they're expediting the process." "That's wonderful news," Jessica replied sincerely. "Will you be working with their trainers at their facility?" "Initially, yes. They have a campus about 30 minutes from Fort Carson. We'll start with 3 sessions per week there, with homework assignments to practice between sessions." The program director was particularly interested in Shadow's tactical communication training, Apparently, it's a perfect foundation for medical alert responses. The development represented a significant step forward in their transition plan. The service dog certification would not only formalize Shadow's role in Michael's ongoing recovery, but would also address the practical requirements for housing accommodations and public access rights. "There's something else," Michael continued, his tone shifting to something more cautious. "The housing office has approved my request for appropriate accommodations, but nothing is available immediately on base. They've offered me the option of transitioning to off-base housing with a stipend, which would actually provide more suitable space for Shadow." "That sounds positive," Jessica observed. "What's your concern?" "It accelerates our timeline. If I accept the off-base housing option, I could move next week. The training program director suggested that having Shadow with me full-time would be beneficial for the certification process." Michael paused. "I know we planned a gradual transition, but I'm wondering if we should consider moving him to my care sooner." The question represented the first significant decision point in their reunification process. The gradual approach had been working well, but circumstances were evolving faster than anticipated. Jessica considered Dr. Matsuda's recommendations, weighing them against the promising progress she had observed. "Let's discuss it when you come today," she suggested, "and perhaps we should try an overnight visit this weekend as a test. Shadow has been doing well with the current arrangement, but you're right that we should be responsive to new opportunities." When Michael arrived that afternoon, they convened a small meeting including James Reeves, who had been serving as their liaison to veteran resources, and Kyle, who had worked closely with Shadow during his shelter stays. Together, they evaluated the potential benefits and risks of accelerating Shadow's transition to Michael's care. "The service dog program is an incredible opportunity," James emphasized. "These specialized programs for veteran military dog teams are rare and usually have long waiting lists. The fact that they're willing to expedite your case speaks to how unique your situation is. And the off-base housing would provide more stability than temporary arrangements on base," Kyle added. "More space, fewer restrictions, a consistent environment during the transition." Jessica observed Shadow during the discussion. The German Shepherd had positioned himself at Michael's side, alert but relaxed, occasionally making eye contact with his handler as if following the conversation. There was a calmness to him that had been absent during his multiple failed adoptions, a sense of rightness that transcended the specific circumstances. "What about his night episodes?" she asked, addressing the most significant concern. "They've been manageable in my home because I'm familiar with the patterns now, but they can be quite intense. Are you prepared for that, Michael?" Michael's expression grew serious. "I've been doing research since you first described them. And to be honest, I've experienced similar episodes myself during recovery. The program director believes that having Shadow with me might actually help both of us. There's emerging research showing that handler dog teams who have shared trauma can develop synchronized responses that help regulate each other's stress. Like therapeutic co-regulation," Jessica suggested, familiar with the concept from Dr. Matsuda's reports. "Exactly. My nightmares might trigger his vigilance, but his presence helps ground me in the present. And when he experiences flashbacks, my voice and commands can help reorient him to current reality." The perspective was compelling. The possibility that their shared traumatic experiences, rather than being an obstacle to their reunion, might actually facilitate mutual healing through understanding that no one else could provide. "I think we should proceed with a test," Jessica decided. "Let's arrange for Shadow to stay with you this weekend. I'll be available by phone if any issues arise, and we can evaluate how it goes before making a decision about the accelerated timeline." The plan was set. Michael would take Shadow home with him on Friday evening and return him to Jessica's care on Sunday afternoon. They would use the trial period to assess how both handler and dog adjusted to full-time cohabitation after their extended separation. Friday arrived with a sense of significance that everyone at the shelter could perceive. Shadow seemed to understand that something different was happening. His alertness had intensified, his attention fixed on Michael with even greater focus than usual. "He knows," Kyle observed as they prepared for departure. "Dogs can sense patterns and anticipate changes in routine. He's picking up on the fact that today isn't following the established pattern of the past week." Michael nodded, keeping a careful eye on his partner for signs of stress. That's why maintaining clear communication is so important during transitions. He needs to understand what's happening and what's expected of him. They had prepared thoughtfully for the overnight trial. Michael had visited Jessica's home to observe her evening routine with Shadow, noting the specific commands and patterns that had become familiar to the German Shepherd. He had brought items from Jessica's house, Shadow's bed, favorite toys and familiar blankets to create continuity in the new environment. Most importantly, he had spent time learning about the specific signs that preceded Shadow's night episodes, the triggers that sometimes initiated them, and the most effective responses. Remember, if he goes into a flashback state, don't try to restrain him, Jessica reminded Michael as they loaded Shadow's belongings into his truck. Speak calmly from a distance, use his tactical signals to orient him, and only approach once he shows recognition. And keep all doors secured, Michael added, demonstrating his careful attention to her guidance. You mentioned he tried to bolt during one episode, looking for exits or perhaps trying to return to a remembered location. As they completed the final preparations, Jessica found herself experiencing unexpected emotion. Though she had fostered dozens of animals temporarily, her connection with Shadow had become particularly meaningful. She had been his advocate when others saw only problems, had discovered the truth of his remarkable background, and had witnessed the extraordinary reunion with his handler. The prospect of his permanent departure, even to the perfect home, created a bittersweet awareness of the attachment she had formed. Shadow seemed to sense her emotional shift. As Michael finished securing the last of the supplies in his truck, the German Shepherd approached Jessica, standing directly before her with his intelligent amber eyes fixed on her face. Without command from either human, he gently pressed his head against her hand, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude that needed no translation. "You take care of each other," she told him softly, kneeling to his level, "and remember, you're always welcome to visit." Michael approached, understanding the significance of the moment. "We couldn't have found each other without you," he said simply. "Whatever happens this weekend, whatever we decide about the timeline going forward, that fact won't change." As they prepared to depart, several shelter staff members gathered to wish them well. Shadow had become something of a celebrity at Pinecrest, the mysterious German Shepherd with 7 failed adoptions, whose remarkable backstory had captivated everyone who learned it. Many had contributed in small ways to his care during his extended shelter stays, and all felt invested in the outcome of his journey. Jessica watched as Michael helped Shadow into the passenger seat of his truck. The German Shepherd settled. With practiced ease, clearly familiar with vehicle transportation, Michael secured a specialized harness that would keep his partner safe during the drive, while still allowing comfortable movement. Every action reflected the careful consideration of a handler deeply attuned to his dog's needs and experiences. "Call me if anything concerns you," Jessica reminded him, "day or night. And remember, this is just a trial. If it's too soon, we can return to our gradual plan." Michael nodded, his expression both serious and hopeful. "I'll keep you updated. And thank you for everything you've done for him and for trusting me to take this step." As the truck pulled away from the shelter, Shadow turned to look back at Jessica through the window, his posture alert but calm. There was no distress in his demeanor, no anxiety about the departure, just the dignified awareness of a working dog embarking on a new mission with his trusted handler. Jessica remained in the parking lot long after the truck had disappeared from view, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From Shadow's first arrival as a stray, through his puzzling cycle of failed adoptions, to the remarkable discovery of his military background and the miraculous reunion with the handler he had been separated from by war. Each step had seemed unlikely, even impossible, until it happened. "Do you think it will work out?" Kyle asked, joining her outside. "The overnight trial, I mean." Jessica considered the question seriously. "I think they're both well prepared for the challenges, and there's something about their connection that transcends ordinary relationships. You can see it in how they communicate, how they anticipate each other's needs. It's like they speak a language no one else understands," Kyle agreed. "Something forged through shared experiences we can barely imagine." As she returned to her office, Jessica found herself thinking about the broader implications of Shadow's story. How many other animals might be misunderstood because their backgrounds remained hidden? How many behaviors labeled as problems might actually be reasonable responses to extraordinary circumstances? Shadow's journey had reinforced her commitment to looking beyond surface presentations, to seeking the deeper truths that explained an animal's actions and needs. That evening, Jessica's home felt unusually quiet without Shadow's presence. She had grown accustomed to his dignified company, to the sound of his measured breathing as he slept on his bed near her bedroom door, to the security of his vigilant attention to unusual sounds. His absence created a space that felt both peaceful and empty. Shortly after 9 o'clock, her phone chimed with a text message from Michael. "First evening going well. Shadow conducted a thorough inspection of the apartment, has eaten dinner, and is now resting comfortably. Will update if anything changes overnight." The simple report brought Jessica a sense of relief and validation. The first critical hours of the transition were progressing smoothly. Shadow was settling into his new environment without signs of distress. The careful preparation appeared to be paying off. As she prepared for bed, Jessica found herself hoping that the night would pass without incident, that Shadow's traumatic memories would remain dormant, allowing both dog and handler to experience the peace of untroubled sleep. Yet she also recognized that the overnight trial needed to reflect reality, including the challenges they would face. A true test could not occur without the potential for difficulty. "Whatever happens," she murmured to herself as she turned out the light, "they're facing it together now, and sometimes that makes all the difference." Jessica's phone rang at 3:17 a.m., pulling her instantly from sleep. Michael's name illuminated the screen, and she answered with immediate concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, already reaching for her clothes, prepared to drive to Michael's apartment if needed. "Yes, actually," Michael replied, his voice carrying an unexpected note of wonder rather than distress. "More than okay. Something remarkable happened, and I couldn't wait until morning to tell you." Jessica settled back, relieved but curious. "I'm listening." "Shadow had an episode about an hour ago," Michael began. "It started the way you described, the rigidity, the focused staring at nothing visible, the trembling. I followed your instructions, speaking calmly from a distance, using his tactical signals." "Did it help?" Jessica asked, knowing how intense these episodes could become. "Initially, no. He seemed completely locked in the memory, unresponsive to commands. But then something changed." Michael paused, as if gathering words for an experience that defied easy description. I was having my own reaction to his distress, flashbacks to the ambush, to the moment we were separated. Instead of trying to help him from a place of calm control, I found myself sitting on the floor, dealing with my own symptoms. Jessica listened intently, understanding the complex interplay of trauma between handler and dog. And then Shadow approached me, Michael continued, still in his own flashback state, but somehow aware of mine. He positioned himself exactly as he would have in the field when we encountered danger, a protective stance, creating a barrier between me and the perceived threat. We were both experiencing the same memory from different perspectives, both trying to protect each other from what we thought was happening. The image was powerful. Handler and dog locked in parallel flashbacks, each instinctively trying to shield the other from remembered danger. "What happened then?" Jessica prompted when Michael fell silent. "The strangest thing. As he performed his protective protocol, I automatically responded with our standard acknowledgement sequence, specific commands and movements that confirmed I recognized the threat he was alerting to. It was muscle memory on both our parts." Michael's voice softened with amazement, and somehow that mutual recognition broke through both our flashback states. The familiar pattern of communication pulled us both back to present reality. Jessica sat up straighter, immediately grasping the significance. "You created a bridge between past and present through your shared protocols." "Exactly," Michael confirmed. By the end of the sequence, we were both fully present again, responding to actual current conditions rather than remembered danger. It was like finding an emergency exit from the flashback through our training. This development was more than just a successful navigation of a difficult moment. It represented a potential breakthrough in understanding how Shadow's specialized training could be repurposed for healing rather than combat. The very protocols that had kept them alive in war zones might now serve as anchors during psychological distress. "That's extraordinary," Jessica said, her mind racing with implications. "It suggests that your connection, the specific patterns of communication you developed during deployment, might be the most effective tool for addressing both your trauma responses." Deem, the service dog program director, mentioned something similar when we spoke, Michael noted. She said that established handler dog teams sometimes develop communication systems that can be channeled into therapeutic techniques, but experiencing it firsthand was. He paused. "I don't have words for it. It felt like coming home, like finding a path when you thought you were lost." After discussing the event in greater detail and confirming that both Michael and Shadow were now resting comfortably, Jessica promised to share the development with Dr. Matsuda. They ended the call with an agreement to continue with the weekend trial as planned. Jessica remained awake after the conversation, too energized by the implications to return to sleep. She made notes for Dr. Matsuda while the details were fresh, outlining the sequence Michael had described and its potential applications for trauma, recovery, the synchronization of their responses, each protecting the other, each recognizing the other's distress despite being caught in their own traumatic memory, suggested a depth of connection that transcended conventional handler-dog relationships. By morning, Jessica had developed a broader perspective on the night's events. What Michael had described wasn't just a successful management of Shadow's episode, but a mutual healing mechanism that neither could have accessed alone. Their shared trauma, rather than being solely a burden, had created a unique pathway for recovery that was inaccessible to those who hadn't experienced similar circumstances. Throughout Saturday, Jessica received periodic updates from Michael. Shadow had adapted seamlessly to the apartment environment, establishing favorite resting spots and maintaining his professional demeanor during outings to nearby areas. They had visited a local park where Michael had practiced service dog protocols under various conditions: exposure to crowds, unexpected noises, encounters with other dogs. Shadow had performed flawlessly, his military training providing an exceptional foundation for civilian service work. The program evaluator came by for an initial assessment, Michael reported in his evening update. She said Shadow's responsiveness and focus are beyond what they typically see, even in fully trained service dogs. She's recommended an accelerated certification process based on his existing capabilities. "That's wonderful," Jessica replied, genuinely pleased by the positive developments. "No further episodes since last night?" "None. We've both been sleeping in 2-hour stretches with short activity breaks between. It's a deployment pattern we both remember. It seems to prevent the deeper sleep states where flashbacks are more likely to occur." The strategy reflected Michael's thoughtful approach to their transition, adapting military protocols to address civilian challenges, creating structure that honored Shadow's training while meeting their current needs. Sunday afternoon arrived with a sense of anticipation. At Pinecrest Shelter, Jessica had informed the staff that Michael would be bringing Shadow back for the scheduled end of their trial period, though whether the German Shepherd would be returning to her care or simply visiting remained to be determined. Several volunteers lingered beyond their shifts, hoping to hear the outcome of the weekend experiment. When Michael's truck pulled into the parking lot, Jessica went out to meet them. Shadow greeted her with dignified recognition, neither overexcited nor distant, the balanced response of a dog secure in his connections and purpose. Michael's appearance had subtly changed as well. He moved with greater ease, his expression more open, his posture reflecting reduced tension. "Shall we talk in your office?" he suggested, indicating the small gathering of curious staff members with a good-natured glance. Once settled in the privacy of Jessica's office, Michael provided a comprehensive report of their weekend together. Beyond the remarkable resolution of Friday night's episode, they had established a smooth routine that incorporated elements of their military partnership adapted to civilian life. Shadow had quickly learned the layout of the apartment and surrounding neighborhood, had responded perfectly to new service dog commands, and had shown no signs of separation anxiety during the brief periods when Michael needed to leave him alone. "We visited the housing office this morning," Michael added. "The off-base apartment I've been approved for will be available next weekend. It's in a quiet area, with good access to the training facility, has a small fenced yard, and allows for Shadow's service role." Jessica nodded, recognizing that the conversation was building toward the inevitable question of next steps. "And how do you feel the trial went overall? Do you believe you're both ready for a permanent transition?" Michael considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "I believe we are. There will be challenges ahead. We both still carry scars from what happened. But what became clear this weekend is that we're stronger together than apart. The very connection that made our separation so difficult is proving to be our greatest resource for healing." The assessment aligned with Jessica's own observations. From the moment of their reunion, Shadow had demonstrated a fundamental change in demeanor, a shift from the dignified but somewhat detached persona of Titan to the purposeful, engaged presence of Shadow. He had never been problematic at the shelter, but he had always seemed slightly removed from his surroundings, as if perpetually waiting for something or someone that never appeared. Dr. Matsuda was extremely interested in what happened during the flashback episode, Jessica shared. She believes it represents a significant breakthrough in understanding how handler dog teams can support mutual recovery. She's asked permission to document your case for potential research applications with appropriate privacy protections, of course. "I'd be open to that," Michael agreed. "If our experience can help other teams, That would give additional meaning to what we've been through. The discussion turned to practical arrangements. Michael would take Shadow with him today, officially assuming responsibility for his care while maintaining close communication with Jessica and the shelter staff. They would proceed with the service dog certification process, with the eventual goal of Shadow receiving full public access rights as Michael's certified service animal. Jessica would remain available for consultation and support during the transition, particularly if any unexpected challenges arose. As they finalized the details, Jessica felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was pride in having facilitated this extraordinary reunion, satisfaction in knowing Shadow was finally receiving exactly what he needed, and yes, a touch of personal sadness at completing a chapter that had been so meaningful in her own professional journey. "I have something for you," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. He removed a slim leather case and handed it to Jessica. "Shadow and I want you to have this." Jessica opened the case to find a military challenge coin, a special token traditionally given to recognize exceptional service or to commemorate significant operations. This particular coin bore the emblem of the Marine Special Operations Command on one side and an engraved paw print on the reverse. "It's Shadow's coin," Michael explained. "Each MARSOC K9 team receives one. I carried it with me throughout my recovery, even after being told he was gone. It seemed right that you should have it now, a token of what you made possible." The gesture touched Jessica deeply. Challenge coins carried significant meaning in military culture, representing brotherhood, shared experience, and mutual respect. That Michael would part with something so personally significant spoke volumes about his gratitude. "I'm honored," she said sincerely, carefully returning the coin to its case. "But perhaps you should keep this for Shadow. It's part of his history, his identity." Michael shook his head. "We're creating new symbols for our current chapter. This one belongs to the person who made our reunion possible when everything suggested it was impossible." His expression grew serious. 7 families gave up on him. The military declared him killed in action, but you kept searching for answers. You recognized there was more to his story than what appeared on the surface. The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion to Jessica's throat. In her years at the shelter, she had advocated for countless animals, seeking the perfect match between pet and adopter. But Shadow's case had challenged her in unprecedented ways, requiring her to look beyond conventional explanations and standard solutions. "Every animal deserves that level of commitment," she said, deflecting the personal praise. "Shadow's case was unusual, but the principle is the same. Understanding the individual behind the behaviors, finding the environment where they can thrive." As they prepared to leave, Shadow approached Jessica and sat directly before her, his amber eyes meeting hers with clear intelligence. Without prompting from Michael, he extended his paw in a formal gesture that seemed to carry deliberate meaning. Not the casual shake of a pet dog, but the intentional acknowledgement of a fellow professional. Jessica accepted the offered paw, recognizing the significance of the gesture. "It's been an honor working with you, Shadow," she said, addressing him with the respect his service and resilience had earned. "You're extraordinary." Michael watched, the exchange with evident appreciation. "We'll visit," he promised, "and keep you updated on our progress. This isn't goodbye, just a transition to the next phase." As they walked toward the shelter exit, several staff members and volunteers gathered to witness the departure. Shadow moved with the dignified bearing that had always distinguished him, but now his purpose was clear rather than mysterious. He wasn't just a beautiful German shepherd with puzzling behaviors. He was a decorated military working dog, reunited with the handler who understood his value and his needs. Kyle approached Jessica as the door closed behind Michael and Shadow. 7 returns, he marveled quietly. 7 families who couldn't see past the surface to what he really needed. And then this, finding his actual handler against impossible odds. It makes you wonder, Jessica replied thoughtfully, how many other animals we encounter have stories we never fully understand. How many behaviors we misinterpret because we don't have the full context. The lesson of Shadow's journey would remain with Pinecrest Shelter long after his departure, a powerful reminder that behind every unexplained behavior might lie a hidden history, and that sometimes the perfect home isn't about finding new connections, but restoring those that were lost against all odds. 3 weeks after Shadow's permanent transition to Michael's care, Jessica received an invitation that both surprised and delighted her. Michael had requested her presence at Shadow's first formal evaluation with the Veterans Service Dog Program, AE, milestone assessment that would determine their readiness to progress to advanced certification training. The evaluation center was located in a renovated farmhouse on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, its sprawling grounds designed specifically for service dog training. Various environmental stations simulated real-world challenges, a mock grocery, store, public transit replicas, crowded sidewalk scenarios, and medical facility reproductions. Here, handler dog teams could practice navigating civilian situations in a controlled setting before facing them in actual public spaces. Jessica arrived 15 minutes early, feeling a mixture of professional curiosity and personal investment. In Shadow's progress, she had maintained regular contact with Michael through texts and occasional calls, receiving updates on their adjustment to cohabitation and the initial training phases. The reports had been consistently positive, with Shadow excelling at the foundational exercises that built upon his military training. Diana Powell, the program director, greeted Jessica in the center's welcoming lobby. A former military K-9 instructor who had transitioned to civilian service dog training after her retirement, Diana combined technical expertise with genuine compassion for both the veterans and canines in her program. "We're so glad you could join us today," Diana said warmly. "Michael speaks very highly of your role in reuniting them. It's a remarkable case, one of the most unusual I've encountered in 15 years of working with handler dog teams." "How have they been progressing in the program?" Jessica asked, as Diana led her through the facility toward the evaluation area. "Extraordinarily well in most respects," Diana replied, her tone conveying professional assessment rather than casual praise. "Shadow's existing training provides an exceptional foundation. His responsiveness, focus, and task execution are at levels we typically don't see until months into advanced training." Jessica noted the qualification in Diana's response. "But there are challenges?" "Yes, though not unexpected ones given their background." Diana paused at a window overlooking an indoor training arena where several handler dog teams were practicing various assistance techniques. "Shadow maintains his military bearing in public settings, hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats, positioned for tactical response rather than service assistance. We're working on helping him transition from a security mindset to a support role." The distinction was significant. Military working dogs like Shadow were trained to detect and respond to dangers, to maintain perimeter awareness, to protect their handlers from external threats. Service dogs, while still attentive to their environment, focused primarily on their handlers' specific needs, whether physical support, medical alerting, or psychological grounding. "Is that creating problems?" Jessica asked, concerned. "Not problems so much as adjustment needs," Diana clarified. "The protective protocols that serve them well in combat zones can be misinterpreted in civilian settings. We're helping Michael redirect Shadow's instincts toward more appropriate civilian responses." They continued through the facility, passing various training stations where other veteran dog teams worked with specialized instructors. Each pairing reflected different needs and capabilities. Some focused on mobility assistance for physical injuries, others on medical alert responses for conditions like diabetes or seizure disorders, still others on the psychological support functions that seemed most relevant to Shadow and Michael's situation. "They're working with Dr. Winters today," Diana explained as they approached an outdoor evaluation area. "He specializes in teams dealing with combat-related trauma. His background as both a psychologist and a former handler gives him unique insight into the challenges they're facing." In the spacious training yard, Jessica spotted Michael and Shadow working with a tall, grey-haired man whose relaxed posture belied the intense focus in his eyes. They were engaged in what appeared to be a controlled stress exercise, Shadow maintaining a steady position beside Michael while various distractions occurred around them. Sudden loud noises, rapid movements from training assistants, and unexpected approaches from strangers. Jessica watched with professional appreciation as Shadow demonstrated his exceptional training. The German Shepherd remained attentive to Michael's subtle cues, adjusting his position seamlessly as they navigated the challenging environment. His vigilance was evident, but controlled, his protective instincts channeled into appropriate responses rather than excessive reactions. Dr. Winters nodded with evident approval as they completed the exercise sequence. He spoke briefly with Michael, placed a hand briefly on Shadow's head in acknowledgement of good work, then noticed the new arrivals. "You must be Jessica," he said, approaching with an extended hand. "Michael has told me about your crucial role in this extraordinary reunion." After introductions were complete, Dr. Winters provided a brief assessment of Shadow's progress in the program. "His core capabilities are exceptional, perhaps the strongest foundation I've seen in a candidate team. The challenge we're working on isn't teaching new skills, but repurposing existing ones for civilian application." Michael, who had been securing Shadow's training equipment, joined the conversation. "The biggest adjustment has been helping him understand that constant threat assessment isn't necessary in everyday environments," he explained. "In deployment, his hypervigilance kept us both alive. Now we're learning to reserve that level of alertness for specific situations rather than maintaining it constantly." Jessica noted the significant changes in both handler and dog since she had last seen them. Michael moved with greater confidence, his prosthetic leg now integrated more naturally into his gait. Shadow carried himself with the same military bearing, she remembered, but there was a subtle shift in his attention focus, less scanning of distant perimeters, more consistent awareness of Michael's positioning and needs. "We've been asked to demonstrate our progress with a community integration exercise today," Michael continued. "It's a significant step, our first evaluation in an actual public setting, rather than the controlled environments we've been working in." Dr. Winters elaborated on the importance of this milestone. "The controlled environments allow us to build skills systematically, but real-world application is the ultimate test. Today's exercise will take place at the Oak Creek Shopping Center, a moderate stimulus environment with enough activity to be challenging but not overwhelming." The evaluation plan called for Michael and Shadow to navigate a series of everyday scenarios, entering and exiting stores, handling interactions with curious strangers, maintaining appropriate positioning in crowded areas, and demonstrating specific service tasks relevant to Michael's needs. Jessica was invited to observe from a distance, accompanied by Diana, while Dr. Winters would follow more closely to assess their performance. As they prepared for departure, Jessica noticed Shadow's heightened alertness, not anxiety but professional focus, as if preparing for an important mission. Michael knelt beside his partner, making direct eye contact. "This is different work, but we're still a team," he said quietly, his tone conveying absolute confidence. Service tasks, not security. Focus on me, not the perimeter. Understood. Shadow's attentive response suggested complete comprehension. Jessica was continually struck by the depth of communication between them, a partnership forged through thousands of hours of training and life-or-death situations that created understanding beyond conventional commands. The shopping center presented exactly the type of environment that had likely contributed to Shadow's previous adoption failures, crowded with weekend shoppers, filled with unpredictable movements and sounds, populated by curious children and other dogs. It embodied the chaotic civilian world that contrasted sharply with the structured, military environments where Shadow had excelled. From her observation position at a cafe table, Jessica watched as Michael and Shadow began their evaluation circuit. The German Shepherd maintained perfect heel position, his attention divided between his handler and their surroundings in a balanced pattern that demonstrated his training. When a child suddenly ran toward them, Shadow remained steady, neither retreating nor advancing, while Michael calmly intercepted the interaction with a polite explanation about working service dogs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.